First of all, it's just interesting to hear the comment there about the previous speakers in the circle that have actually worked and done presentations on their journey through life and looking and finding their own excitement, if you will, in this process. The other thing that was mentioned in the minutes, is there anybody here that's friends, relations with Rob Cooper, high-ranking Scottish Masons at all? Do you know him? Oh, good. Well, feedback, comments from today, please. The reason that I mention him is that he was present on my very first attempt at giving this speech, which was something like 15 years ago now. And I was privileged to give a talk on the subject that you're going to hear now to Sir Walter Scott's current family, the Maxwell Scotts, the Advocate of Scotland, Stephen Woolerman, and other of the people working in and around Abbotsford at the time that it was about to fail. And they had noted that the Da Vinci Code had taken the visitors through Rosslyn Chapel through the roof because of the story by Dan Brown. And they were thinking about ways and means and looking at the question of whether Abbotsford, because of its relationship to Rosslyn Chapel, could do a similar thing. And I had already been on the journey for a little while, so I'll make a start and explain. I went to Abbotsford in 2005 and looked around because I'd heard of this relationship between the story, and as you'll see in a moment, I've been following Walter Scott from a very, very early age. So I'll do a brief introduction about me and how I came to this point in talking to you today. I'll look at Scott as a poet, but I won't take long because we all know he's a poet of first order. Hello, come on. And then we'll discuss whether he was a Templar, and I will be able to say to you categorically he was not, but I will also go on to say, did he know about Templars? And the answer is, of course, you bet. And then I'll show you some interesting finds that do, I think, tie the relationship between the chapel at Rosslyn to Sir Walter Scott's library in a very interesting way, because it says quite a lot about Sir Walter Scott himself, I think. So, who's read Da Vinci Code? Good. Who went back further than that? Starting point for me was the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Here is my copy. Battered. Signed by my children. And signed by Henry. He said to me, what do you want me to write in here, Stephen? I said, I don't know. So he wrote, I don't know. Henry, yours. That's symptomatic of the man, I'm afraid. Very clever, very precocious. And I don't always believe him. That for me was the starting date, believe it or not, 1965, when I was at boarding school. That's me over there. We've got the same tummy and the same chest. Boarding school for children with asthma. Was very ill, a bit like Walter Scott himself, and became completely occupied by the Knights Templar story. And when the other kids were watching Doctor Who, which Henry had just produced, of course, I was actually reading this very copy of Ivanhoe, which you're very welcome to pass around. It was 2 and 6. It was all my pocket money for a month. And because Doctor Who was so frightening, the Daleks gave me asthma, they let me watch Ivanhoe instead. So here's Simon Templar. No, it's not. A little slip there. It's not Mr. Templar. It's actually Roger Moore in the role. And for those Masons that see the black and white behind him, I didn't understand that as a 9-year-old. So subsequently, I've been all over the place. I've trucked around Europe trying to get to grips with what was going on in terms of the Knights Templar. How did, on the one hand, the stories of Sir Walter Scott portray the Templars as high, vain, authoritative, generally ghastly, and on the other hand, the stories that we read and find in Look and Learn about the way in which the Templars were done down by their church, that they were protecting, that they were so defensive of people working their way through to the Holy Land. 40 years it took me to get to this point. This is Pérépéteuse, one of the Cathar castles which has a connection with the Templars. It's one of the high points in the Languedoc. And in Cathar language, Pérépéteuse is the lost stone, which I think has quite a meaning for us as Masons. I've climbed the castles at Kervis as well. Again, French family names, Templar family names throughout France. If you can follow them, you can learn much. Brought me to the point, of course, that I had seen and understood that 18th of March was going to be a very symbolic day on 2014. And I thought, well, let's go and see what happens. And I turned up at the Ile de Juif in the centre of Paris, where the Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay was burned, along with several of his other friends. And I thought, well, there's bound to be some skull and bones men from America or some other fellow Templar freaks. But there was no one. Absolutely not a job, not a person. Apart from me, I am standing there, saw it in through from darkness to daylight. And I felt quite proud of the fact that I'd actually made the effort because no one else had. There's my black and white square. This is me. I was celebrating the 125th year of our Suffolk Singing Lodge. It was great fun. So, let's go to France and pick up the story and find a way of tracking it back to Sir Walter Scott. When I first went in 1982, we just had Henry's book and a black and white picture and a very poor map. But I did manage to locate it. My background is as a town planner, a map reader, so I did find that. And just in behind that setting, there is actually the original tomb, or the facsimile of the tomb, depending upon who you believe. Just tucked in behind there, the farmer had actually chopped down bushes because he was fed up with people clambering down off the road, wading through the river, up the rocks to take pictures of the thing. He actually blew it up. It was done like 2 years later. He'd had enough. And of course, as a result of that, when I finally was able to join the Saunier Society and meet Henry Lincoln, see him in France, go travelling with them, I took on and understood a fair bit more of the geometry as he described it. And when I say I didn't always believe Henry, when he converted this lovely stuff that he took from his book, which is a great story, took a lot of us forward, many, many steps. But when you actually saw him doing this, as a surveyor, if you like, as a planner, I know about maps, I've drawn on maps, and I never use a thick felt tip pen. I would always use something fine. But on a number of occasions, the way in which the lines were described on the map just changed ever so slightly, 1 or 2 degrees, just to get that line to make a nice sweet star on the page. This one's more interesting in the French landscape. I'd like to remember that image because I'm going to come back to that in a minute or two. And I'm going to stop the drink. So, have a look at the picture. I've actually been fortunate enough to have sufficient finance arising from my trade that I've been able to buy some lovely things as I've gone along. And I managed to purchase the complete works of Poussin in the form when it was last pulled together as a major study. So I've got some good images from them. And I'm always remarking in this picture, not only on the fact that this old shepherd appears in so many of the Poussin paintings, he's not just an old shepherd, but also if you look at these two lads in the picture, they, for me, are twins. They look so alike, they look like they are identical twins, and people say, oh, well, that's because Poussin used the same art life form to do his paintings. You watch and see as we track through, there's others, and they are so clearly, in my view, the twins. This lady is also present in Poussin's own personal self-portrait. She features just behind him in a mirror image on a wall. So she's in the room with him, and this face is again one that comes through time and time again and is well worthy of further research. So, we've seen old Beardy there, and now that is a lovely picture for me because it is the black and white of Abbotsford. It's in silhouette, it portrays a sense of foreboding, and it is straight out of a Gothic novel. He wrote The Bride of Lammermoor, which was in itself a retort to other Gothic novels of the time, Vathek and Frankenstein indeed. He wanted to portray this feeling, this sense of darkness. I say it's like Strawberry Hill in Tartan, which is a bit of a cheap joke, but that's the way it is. The place was built with some decidedly dodgy, I would say, accounting. Creative accounting, we call it these days. He took money in advances from his own publishing company that was in partnership with with the Palatines, which subsequently failed, but he took money in advances before he'd actually finished writing the books he was going to take the money from. So great was his popularity. And of course, eventually, he passed this stately pile on to his son at the time that the creditors were coming looking for him because of his first set of debts being unpaid. He in fact folded twice, both times in current day terms 125, 148,000 in those days are close to 8 to 9 million and subsequently 12 and 13 million pounds, the two failures that he had. But just at the right moment, he passed this on to his son, so none of the creditors could get at the value of the estate. So, well done, Walter Scott. And of course, you talk about him as a human being in front of his family and in front of Rob Cooper, and you start to get on very thin ice, because this is the man that gave Scotland the crown jewels back. This is the man that gave Scotland tartan back, because he persuaded the king to allow tartan to be brought back into favour. So, be careful where you go with Sir Walter Scott. It's taken me 12 years to come out of the closet again. So now, let's have a look at the interior. I was actually there on a town planning summer school at Heriot-Watt University and thought, yes, this is the chance. Went down and had a look around, got in for the last 2 hours of the day and barely had enough time because, like others I know that have been there, I'm sure, I don't know how many of you have actually been to Abbotsford, but there is just so much to see. Every little element of this place is something new for you to look at, to see, and maybe, hopefully, to understand. And so I was in the mood, I was in the groove, and of course, when I saw dear old Beardies, I thought, you know, you get these images, these motifs in your mind. You thought, oh, Walter Scott did know something. And then I carried on, and I've already heard you mention today. We talked about the ancient rites. A lovely, lovely picture of characters that I would know from the Mesopotamian era as Domuts and Inanna, or Tammuz, you may know them. Of course, they're also, with the flower pots on their heads, potentially Serapis and Isis. I better read this bit because I won't get it right otherwise. The cult of Serapis was introduced during the 3rd century BC on the orders of Ptolemy I of Egypt as a means to unify the Greeks and the Egyptians in his realm. The god was depicted as Greek in appearance but with Egyptian trappings, and combined iconography from many great cults, signifying both abundance and resurrection. And so we get for the first time to see and think about Walter Scott as somebody that believed in other than his own church's resurrection. He placed himself in a room, we'll see in a moment, but on the other side of the room, and I apologise in advance for this picture. This is taken from a still picture, but it is the same two characters, but younger versions of the same. I have to say, I've always been this size, and this room is the octagonal room at the back of the study, which is no more than 6 feet wide. And so I'm standing here with my original stills camera, shaking like a leaf, excited at the prospect, but I can assure you that is the equivalency of the other two that we've just looked at, Inanna and Domuts. And they sit on either side of the octagon, and in the centre of the octagon, of course, is his death mask. Now, I mustn't lose sight of the fact that this has been bought and paid for and designed by Walter Scott himself. This is the way that he wishes to be seen in perpetuity, in the setting not of a Catholic chapel, but in the setting of an octagon with ancient gods on either side of him. So, I think comparisons, the milieu in which he lived with. This is also the Rosslyn Chapel cabinet, which myself and a couple of friends found when we were allowed in those days to wander around unguarded, and we looked in down below in the chapel area and saw this thing. It had got Christmas decorations and baubles in it. And we spoke to Judith Fiskin, that was originally the lady manager at the Rosslyn Chapel. And she managed to get it pulled out, dusted off, and we took these pictures. They're not regularly seen, I don't think, but nonetheless, it's a fascinating piece because Inanna and Domuts appear on either side of the cabinet. And we'll look at the interpretation of this later on, but it's just a lovely thing. And if you like arches and you like two old boys who might be Jarkin and Boaz peering in on things, you might find that of interest. It's a very ancient piece, it hasn't been dated properly. So, back in France, we're coming now to the Lay of the Minstrels, Walter Scott's famous poem, proves he's a poet. And I'm going to pass it round. It's battered and torn. You won't be accused. It's already fallen to pieces, and if you know of any good bookmakers, please do. But have a look at the page with the bookmark in it, because I got that online, and I just was so amazed. I was so pleased and excited. In the top left-hand corner of the page, with a lovely bookmark from about 1911, 1920, there's a comment there about, falls open at the page, about the Knights of the Rosy Cross. So I thought, this book's come to me, it's found its home for now, I'll look after it and give it on to somebody else. I think you're in the zone with this, and sometimes these things just have a habit of falling into place. The Lay of the Last Minstrelsy, for my money, is the Scottish form of the tales from the Cathal country. This is the Minstrel's Tower in Puivert Castle, and in the centre of the fan vault, which is a fantastic piece of carving, fantastic piece of geometry, we find this lovely couple. Now, in the local parlance, this is the Ascension of Mary. The Annunciation of Mary. Ascension. The Annunciation of Mary. But I find this to be far too cosy, and in a minstrel's gallery where courtly love and everything else seem to be going on, with all of the minstrels playing in the stonework around, I think that this is actually a lovely representation of a king and his Chastelaine, the Chastelaine that looks after the castle after he's gone off into the Holy Land to defend our religion. Around and about in Puivert, the angels are present. They're playing things. They've got a hurdy-gurdy. They've got banjos and more angels. It's a lovely place to see and to just take time to photograph properly. And it's probably no surprise that in 1400 later on, hello, come on in. In 1400 or so later on, when they're starting to do Rosslyn Chapel, they too have got a fantastic collection of minstrels. And thank you. And so I loved the fact that there was this comparison, that they were so closely allied between the Puivert Minstrels Gallery and the minstrels in Rosslyn. And therefore it was also an excitement when we found the same Abbotsford players, similar, very, very similar in character. This bloke here playing the same hurdy-gurdy, winged angels, another one up there, lute and a banjo down here. So, as you'd expect, a good facsimile of what you found in Rosslyn Chapel. And it was as we were going around, or as I was going around looking at these things, I suddenly was photographing and getting closer and closer. And I started to think, well, that's a bit funny. And I thought I was in the presence of something which had a double meaning. So, before we go any further, hands up, who can see a duck and who can see a rabbit? Ducks? Rabbits? Both? Excellent. How about that? Young lady with a choke around her neck? Excellent, good. Old lady with a big pimple on her nose? Oh, you put your hand up first. And if you can see both, can you see both? Excellent. Because I'm going to ask you to take that mindset through now and look at a couple of these bosses from within the chapel. Look very closely and follow this man's eyes. I call him a green king because I come from Suffolk, and that's what we have over there. But here's his mouth, nose, eyes. I'm going to revolve this with a series of photographs that I just photoshopped. There's no funny business at this stage, just a straightforward check. Can you still see the eyes? No, still okay? Start to see what's happening. Any got it? I'll take it back. Eyes at the top of the head, the nose here, big mouth, long beard. Sorry, wrong one. Let me swing round again. Can you see the eyes changing? The nose is here and there's more hair. And the bit that was the beard is now his crown. And the crown has got a pair of horns coming up out of the side of the face. Can you all see that? Well, I think that's tromperie at its best, at its very, very best. And when you actually get to read I've put that on there, that's my only trick, so that you can definitely see his face. Little blue marking, it's there for you to see. And so the Green King man I spotted had actually got a double meaning. And of course he is the little devil. He's mentioned in a number of occasions by Walter Scott, of course, in Witchcraft and Demonology. And there are his names in various guises. I particularly like Pie Wacket, I don't know why, but there's all sorts of lovely little names. And the Scottish Highland Urisk, that we'll also mention in a moment, which was also a part goat, part man with horns, will follow. A couple of bosses down, we can try and do the same thing. Eyes at the top, nose, green man, sort of green beard feeling thing going on there. Keep your eye on it and know that I'm not squizzing you. There's a junction in the plasterwork, okay? That junction in the plasterwork will stay present in this picture as I go around. Change the tone on it slightly, but it's still the same. There's the face and the eyes, the mouth, and the funny beard. Hello, come on, just get to the good bit. The second good bit. Watch the face spin round. Got it this time? Nose up here, mouth, forked beard, horns. See it? Happy with it? Accepting? Try that. So that green man has become that Urisk. And I say the Urisk in this instance is the same as the Tormenter in Durer, who also knows about this stuff. And I also suggest that with the forked beard and the horns and the fact that it's in Poussin, Walter Scott wanted to portray the devilment, the panic of the countryside, the pan, the natural feeling, because he is a man of the Enlightenment. And the whole question of man's acceptance of the country, rural life, domination of nature is fascinating. Not what the Walter Scott's family wanted me to be talking about, but nonetheless one which I think is a very real aspect of his life. And I believe he was very mystically conscious. He was aware of these things being around and about. And I think, as I say here, I think there are others. This is another one of the angels, got a flute in his hand there, and you roll him round, and you switch off the lights, and he's become Black Shook, the hairy dog of hell, the hellhound. He's got his tongue sticking outside of his nose, and his long lop ears. We call him Black Shook over in Suffolk. So, other links to the storyline that I was trying to portray at the time are important ones, and I think it will help to go to prove that Sir Walter Scott had a very broad sense of the stories, the traditions from France. This is Temple Ballintroduc, which is part of the estate of the Dundas family. The Dundas family from the borders were really top of the Christmas list, top of the dinner list for Sir Walter Scott at Abbotsford. They came and visited regularly. And there's the Dundas family stone in the bottom of the Ballintroduc castle. The reason that it's important is that Marie Graham, who was the daughter of the same Lord Dundas that was chummy with Sir Walter Scott, later became Maria Calcott, and she was a British writer and artist, but she was also a great biographer. And strange to say, but like others that have looked in the library and fascinated, if you're in the right groove, out of 4,000 books, I saw The Life of Poussin by this woman, Graham. I didn't know there was a relationship to Dundas. I took the picture and then did the necessary research, went to the Central Library in Edinburgh, spoke to the bloke who was working in conjunction with Abbotsford at the time and said, what about this Poussin, book of Poussin, can I get to it? It's now, fortunately, online, so you can read every single sentence of it and not have to fight to gain access to it. But it is one of only 14 books out of the 5,000 or so that's about painting in Walter Scott's library. he hated it with a passion. He tried to learn painting, he had a personal coach to help him painting, and he was very disparaging about this young man because he was a Jew, and he wasn't very happy with Jews at the time because they just sorted out his mortgage for him. And so I know for sure that he, Walter Scott, would have been interested in the fact that Poussin was now coming into Scotland as part of the Grand Tours. Duke of Sutherland was buying up Poussins and putting them into the National Gallery in Scotland. And so I think it's really quite exciting that the stories that Poussin contains, which is about the twins that I mentioned earlier, about gods and goddesses, not just strictly proper Catholic stories that were told in front of the popes of Rome at the time, where Poussin was painting. He did a lot of work on these countryside landscapes and the alternatives. You can see in them, I reckon that one there and that one there is a twin. If you look very handily, they've got their hands in the same position, they've got the same face in the same position, they've got the same length of beard. And there are others. In this baptism, there's something spooky going on because this bloke is completely clothed. And is that because you don't have two twins of important family lines out and about at the same time together? I don't know, you have an argument about whether they're chubby kids or whether they're twins in that story. And also there's old Beardy sitting in the background. Who is he? I don't know. So, I asked you before to look at this. That lovely thing there is the landscape geometry, and that's the Walter Scott's family crest. I think that's enough for me to say. I'm sure he knew what was going on. I'm sure there were things that are parallels in France and Scotland, and I think the old alliance goes back a lot further than we used to think. I think that'll do. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
Good. Next. So I just whilst you're thinking about that, I'm not entirely sure that I'll be able to answer. One of the points I did and should have made in the talk was the question of whether Walter Scott was actually a Templar. Now we know that he's written about the Templars on several occasions in various guises, but his status as a Freemason is confirmed, and this is a mild thing I picked up along the way, so Walter Scott as a Freemason by A.M. Mackay. I don't think it's online, but you might be able to find it now. But it does confirm that the Grand Master of the Royal Grand Conclave of Knights Templar of Scotland, which was Sir Alexander Durer, I'm sure I know his whisky familiar, but Duker's was the Grand Master, and having opened and constituted the conclave, he said it's been long his wish to have resigned the office of the Grand Master of the Order of Templars, which in virtue of the charter granted by His late Royal Highness the Duke of Kent was vested in him for life. But he wanted to hand it on, but it had to be to somebody that was, good standing, and he happened to believe that he would have accepted it. The personage to whom he alluded was Sir Walter Scott. So the Grand Master of the Templars of Scotland, the Masonic Templars of Scotland, wanted to hand it on to Sir Walter Scott. Unfortunately, the letter went to the wrong house for Sir Walter Scott in Edinburgh, but he did get it eventually, and the invitation was declined. He said, "I've received only yesterday your obliging letter." This is 2 ducats from Scott. "It was not my fault, it was misdelivered. And thanks for the honour you have designed me in putting me up for the nomination of the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. It is an honour which I am under the necessity of declining, my health and age not permitting me to undertake the duties which, whether convivial or charitable, a person undertaking such an office must oversee." So he was clearly so knowledgeable about the Knights Templar, he was found to be an appropriate person to become the next Grand Master. But like a lot of us, as you get older, you don't want to learn the lines. So I think that's an interesting point, and it's the last aspect of the chat.
Well, thanks very much, Stephen.